What does it mean to make a society legible? Not just its land, but its people, its cities, its language. In Chapter 1, we saw how the state simplifies nature. Forests became timber, land became property, complex systems became measurable. But in Chapter 2, this logic expands. Now the object of simplification is not just the environment, but society itself. The goal remains the same, to take something complex, local, and lived, and transform it into something that can be mapped, categorized, recorded, and controlled. Traditional cities are not designed. They emerge, street by street, layer by layer. They reflect habit, necessity, and adaptation over time. Markets form where people gather. Paths form where people walk. Neighborhoods evolve without a central blueprint. But from the perspective of the state, this kind of city is difficult because it is irregular, unpredictable, and resistant to standardization. It cannot be easily mapped, it cannot be easily monitored, and it cannot be easily controlled. So cities begin to change. Streets are straightened, grids are introduced. Neighborhoods are divided into zones. The grid is a tool. It allows the state to navigate space more easily, deploy authority more effectively, and observe from above. But it also transforms the city into something abstract. A lived environment becomes a mere diagram. We can see this process clearly in 19th century Paris. Under Napoleon III, the city was radically redesigned by George Eugene Haussmann. Medieval Paris had been dense, irregular, difficult to navigate, and difficult to control. Narrow streets made movement slow, and in times of unrest they made resistance possible. Barricades could be built, crowds could gather, authority could be challenged. So the city was transformed. Wide boulevards were cut through the old neighborhoods, streets were straightened, sight lines were opened. The result was a city that was easier to navigate, observe, and control. Troops could move quickly, crowds could be dispersed, and the city, once opaque, became legible from above. But the transformation was not only about control. It also made the city more sanitary, more open, less vulnerable to disease. At the same time, entire neighborhoods were demolished, and many residents were displaced. Order improved the city, but it also reshaped who the city was for. This logic extended beyond cities themselves into infrastructure. Railways and roads were often designed not simply to connect communities, but to serve the needs of the state. Lines were built to move troops efficiently, to reach borders quickly, to project power outward. On paper, this made perfect sense. It was rational, strategic, legible. But reality does not always follow the map. In conflicts like the Franco-Prussian War, systems designed for clarity and control did not always perform as expected. Because infrastructure optimized for centralized planning did not always align with the actual conditions on the ground. What was efficient in design proved less effective in practice. What was optimized for clarity was not always optimized for reality. This is what Jane Jacobs later criticized. She argued that cities function because of their complexity, because of informal interactions, overlapping uses, constant adaptation. Remove that complexity, and the city may become orderly, but less alive. And the same logic applies to individuals. In earlier societies, identity was flexible. Context mattered. A person might be known by different names in different settings, but to the state this is sheer confusion. So identity becomes fixed, permanent last names, official records, registries. These systems emerged as a part of a broader effort to make populations legible. A person becomes identifiable, traceable, and accountable. We can see the limits of this process in the standardization of names. In places like the Philippines, authorities imposed fixed surnames to make populations easier to record and administer. On paper, this made society more legible, more orderly, more manageable. But something else was lost. In many cases, names were not just labels, they were tied to systems of knowledge. They could indicate family relationships, social roles, and connections to land and obligation. They helped people understand who belonged where, who was connected to whom, and how resources were used. When these naming systems were replaced, that embedded knowledge did not transfer cleanly. It was flattened or erased. In making people easier to identify, the system made them harder to understand. What had once helped people navigate their social world was reduced to something the state could record. And then the process goes deeper. Language itself becomes an object of simplification. Local dialects, rich, diverse, contextual, are replaced with standardized forms. A single language, a single grammar, a single official way of speaking. Because language allows the state to educate uniformly, communicate efficiently, administer consistently. But once again, something is lost. Local nuance, regional identity, ways of speaking that do not translate cleanly into the standard. And now the pattern is unmistakable. To make society legible, you simplify it. To simplify it, you remove variation. And in removing variation, you remove local knowledge, informal systems, and adaptive practices. This echoes what Friedrich Hayek warned, that knowledge in society is not centralized. It is dispersed, local, embedded in practice. And what Max Weber described as rationalization, the movement towards systems that are efficient, predictable, and calculable. And this leads to a crucial point. To make a society legible, it is not just to understand it, it is to reshape it. Cities are redesigned, names are fixed, language is standardized, and with each step, the state sees more clearly, but reality becomes more distant. Legibility creates order, but it is a particular kind of order, one that is simplified, centralized, and abstract, an order that works well on paper but not always in practice. In the next chapter, we move from simplification to something more ambitious, the attempt not just to organize society, but to redesign it entirely. I'll see you in the next episode.